Hello and welcome to Curiosity Cake. I'm your host Lee Delaney. My guest for this episode is Margee Kerr. Margee is a sociologist and author and currently teaches and conducts research on fear with a focus on why people engage in scary experiences like haunted attractions, horror movies and paranormal investigations. She also works as a consultant for attractions and museums and is the author of Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, which was named as a must-read by the Washington Post. Her latest book, co-authored with Linda Rodriguez McRobbie, is called Ouch, Why Pain Hurts and Why It Doesn't Have to. At the end of our chat, look out for some promos for podcasts I'm loving at the minute, and as always, hit the subscribe button, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser and Good Pods, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram via the link tree in the notes. But for now, get yourself a cup of tea, grab a fork and dig into a slice of curiosity cake. Curiosity Cake. Margee, welcome to Curiosity Cake. Thanks very much for giving me your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I think this is really brilliant subject. So you're a sociologist of fear, which just sounds absolutely brilliant in itself, I think. But you're studying fear induced from situations that people choose to put themselves into. So kind of fear as something that people do for fun. Right. So can you tell us how you got into studying that?
Sure. I grew up I grew up enjoying haunted houses and Halloween, reading scary stories and just, doing kinds of thrill-seeking activities. And I always, had a lot of fun with it. And as I got older, of course, I had that question of why would people want to do things that are scary? And so I started really looking at that, why do people want to engage with scary material? Why would we seek out, quote unquote, negative experiences? So I started really looking at that around 2014. I teamed up with a cognitive neuroscientist, Greg Siegel at University of Pittsburgh. And we developed a protocol to look at it, to ask people, how they feel before and after doing scary activities, to try and see what people are getting out of the experience. And that's resulted in a lot of really interesting findings that we're continuing to work on and look at.
So can you tell us more about the protocol there? Because I'm really curious about how you actually study fear.
Sure. So it's because of the ethical guidelines, of course, you can't intentionally terrify people too much. And so what we did is we designed our protocol to only recruit research participants from people who had already purchased a ticket to go through a haunted house. And that way we were, making sure that we weren't exposing anyone to something that they didn't want to experience. And that was what we wanted to look at was, the people who were the people who want to do these types of things.
Yeah, they're willingly choosing to be involved in this.
Right. So we set up a little mobile lab in the basement of this haunted attraction, and we asked people a lot of different survey questions. We couldn't ask, we couldn't get into a lot of detail there. Where we wanted to do some psychological scales and things like that, but our institutional review board said, we couldn't get into any kind of area that was too that delved too much into a person's background, because we were out in the real world, not in a more controlled lab setting. So we asked people, about their motivations and their expectations and how they felt. And then we hooked them up to a mobile EEG, and they went through 15 minutes of different types of activities. So looking at different types of pictures and having to do different types of tasks in their minds, like, addition, subtraction. And we monitored their brainwave activity while they were doing those tasks. And then they went through the attraction and we did the same thing all over again. So we could look at all the different changes that happened from pre to post. So that's how we, kind of set up the study. And, we were able to see how these experiences change the way people feel and change, their brainwave activity.
So what kind of experiences were they having in the haunted house?
So this was a more intense haunted attraction. It allowed the actors to touch the guests, so it was way more intense. So there were, opportunities where guests were blindfolded or, put into different types of, constraining kind of environments, and the content was a lot more intense and more extreme. So it wasn't the traditional kind of linear walk through haunted attraction where there's just lots of startle scares.
Right, okay. Which sounds really interesting because I grew up watching a lot of horror movies, and there's quite an easy way to go about making horror movies that are those startle scares, like things jumping out from out of nowhere and really big loud noises that accompany it. But that sounds like a really interesting kind of attractions. How do you kind of ramp up that kind of level?
So it's when I think about designing, it's really about crafting a journey that ultimately will make people feel like the hero rather than the victim. So taking people in and giving them opportunities to be courageous. So I forget all of the different scenes and scenarios because it's been a bit since then. But doing things where the narrative really puts people into a space where they might feel like their lips are actually being sewn together, but it's really all just illusion and kind of you put people into a dark environment and you have a scary story and we're already there. We're already primed to go into to suspend that our disbelief and really believe that we're in these scary situations.
And what kind of results did you get then in testing people before and afterwards?
So we found that people's mood, so we asked them to rate their mood on a scale of 1 to 10, and it improved significantly. And so that was a big finding, is just that, yes, it ironically helps people feel better. It also, people felt less tired, less stressed, less anxious, and the scarier the better. So those changes were related to people rating the experience as more intense and thrilling and scary. And then those positive changes were also related to people reporting to feel like they challenged their fears and learned about themselves. So these are things that kind of, we would expect. But it was, great to actually get the data to show that, yes, we do feel better when we have opportunities to challenge ourselves and to succeed. And then we found that those positive changes were related to some changes in patterns of brainwave activity, namely the global reactivity went down. So the best way to kind of describe it is kind of that feeling of feeling like you're, have gotten out of your head, or you kind of checked out, or that kind of comfortably just blank kind of state. It's very similar to what we see in, the runner's high or deep meditative states. It's basically just when you have, you're fully in your body. You're not caught up in thinking about what you have to do tomorrow. You're not ruminating. You're just, fully in the present moment. And that was related to feeling good, which is, makes sense. A lot of us work in our head all day, and it feels good to just be in the moment in our body.
And that really relates to, I guess you're talking there, the runner's high, the idea of the flow state in sports and things, which I did an episode on not too long ago, one of my first episodes actually. And like you say, that's really kind of putting you in the moment and putting you in your body, that seems to kind of help people just forget about other things that they're worrying about.
Yeah, it's a nice way to just kind of press pause on all the internal dialogue.
So what goes on for people then when they are in that fear state?
Well, it's, variation is the norm. So even though we have, this concept that we call fear, the experience of it is very much individualized and constructed from so many different things. So, when I feel scared, it could be, we have lots and lots of different types of feelings of fear. So, it's not something that you can, write down and measure exactly the same from person to person and even within the same person. So, fear can't be kind of reduced to a certain heart rate or presence or absence of different neurochemicals. It really is whatever we, decide is fear is fear. So when it comes to what's happening, we can talk about patterns and see these types of trends among populations. But ultimately, it's going to be that individual who's kind of constructing that moment, that experience. And I think that's one of the biggest things I learned throughout the course of my research is that all of our emotions are not these discrete states. They're all constructed from all of our past experiences and who we're with, where we are, why we want to be there. All of that goes into constructing an experience of an emotion. There's a lot of opportunity because then we're not, we can have more say in how we want to construct those experiences. So for people who, are choosing to go and do scary things, they're going in with a certain set of motivations and expectations, and all of that goes into creating the experience, which ultimately is something that they want. So it's because they wouldn't spend time or money on it if they didn't want it. So for what we were seeing, I think is that in the aftermath of this experience, people, were essentially satisfied. They got what they wanted, what they, went in to experience. And so all of the neurochemical changes that were happening, go into that construction of a positive, fun, scary, challenging experience where they, came out on top with their friends.
So could we go as far as to say that for some people that experience of fear could be like a relaxing activity?
Yeah, it could ultimately lead to a state of relaxation. I think that there's, the sympathetic nervous system, when it ramps up, it's going to create all of that energized kind of feeling, the adrenaline and, racing heart, all of that kind of stuff. But on the other side of that can be relaxation and, a feeling of calm. So it's sort of, climbing the mountain and getting to the top in the moment of like, okay. And a lot of that's, our sympathetic nervous system that's ramping up that fight or flight response. And when it's over, our parasympathetic system is, working to kind of bring us back down to rest and relax. So it's really kind of an intentional, manipulation of our balancing systems to get to that physical state that we're looking for.
Yeah, because I imagine there's a very big difference where people are choosing to be in situations that are scary, and then when they're not choosing that.
Choice is everything. I mean, it really is such a monumental difference in outcome and in experience. The moment that we don't feel like we have agency, that's the change from something feeling triumphant to something feeling traumatizing. So it really, people who are choosing to do it, who feel a sense of control, that's where, the positive gains can come in. But when that is gone, that's where, it can turn to trauma. And so it really is, choice is just absolutely everything.
So does that mean there's no potential for people to go through experiences that are scary that they're not choosing, but come out the other side and get not necessarily a kind of positive response, but that kind of response that is, I've gone through some kind of adversity and I've developed some strength through that, or not strength, but I've kind of developed, learned something from that I can take something from to support me in my life at this moment.
No, there's definitely opportunity for growth and for, even traumatic experiences to be empowering. And it is comes back to those individual differences, but there's a ton of research into post-traumatic growth, or even, someone who is, has their wallet stolen. For some people, that's going to be very traumatizing. For other people, it might not be experienced as traumatizing. So it really comes down to that person and their history and their experience, and how their body reacts to stress. All of that goes into it. It's more, when you're looking at the goal being, feeling good, that's where you want to make sure that people have a sense of agency.
Yeah. And your work also looks at the differences in people's experience of fear across different cultures. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So because our emotions are constructed from all these different things, language and culture plays a huge part of how we understand our experiences and how we express our emotions. So, Americans tend to be more expressive. This is just my observations of watching people go through haunted attractions, and Americans tend to be louder. And when I was in Japan, there are differences in kind of the facial expressions and vocalizations. All of that is influenced by our surroundings and our culture, and then also what we consider scary. So, in Japan, ghosts are a really popular monster. In the U.S., we have our trends in the monster of the year, whether it's zombies or witches or demons. But all of that, you can see the influence of religion and history and storytelling. And so, when you want to understand a culture, you can kind of look through the lens of what is feared and how is fear expressed, and what kinds of experiences are going to kind of live in the realm of entertaining horror versus, no, that's not, don't even get near that. That's too scary. Can't be seen in a fun way. So I think that's really a very cool kind of lens to understand different cultural histories, and also look at the influence of religion and ideas about, what happens after we die. The kind of universal fear is thinking about what happens after we die.
And horror movies must be a really good example of that, like comparing American horror movies to Japanese horror movies.
There's been some.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm thinking of things like when you look at things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or like the kind of slasher movies and Hostel and things like that, compared to things like Ring and those kind of more ghost type based, very very kind of psychologically haunting kind of movies that come out of Japan.
Yeah, there have been some really great essays comparing, American versions versus the original Japanese versions. And I think with The Grudge, there was a great essay that kind of highlighted how the Americanized version really focused more on the characters, where the Japanese version was about the location, more of the ghosts are tied to location. But, Americans, we love our narratives of people, that we like to get into the characters and relate. And so it was, it shifted in where the focus was. And also, I believe the American version had more expressive, basically the ghosts were made to, or the cinematography was more kind of dramatic in a kind of explicit way. So it wasn't quite as subtle, I guess, as it would be a way to say it. But you do see those cultural differences and what audience are looking for, if it's a lot of blood or the subtle kind of scare.
Yeah, and I guess also that you would get each of those cultures feeding into each other as well. Yeah.
That's, it's just the kind of diversity, the ability of people to collaborate across borders. We see just really awesome storytelling and horror movies and attractions too. It's really a great time to be able to collaborate.
So given all those things, like the haunted houses and horror movies and stories and things like that, where there are actually a considerable number of people who are enjoying that experience, it seems like fear is something that is seen as very much a negative kind of experience, but maybe there's some positives there. So how is it, like, do you have any thoughts on why have we come to just see fear as just purely a negative thing?
I think so much of it comes down to our limitations in vocabulary, that we use this one word to capture such a diversity of experience. So that's why I try and use the word fun, scary a lot, because it is such a different experience from trauma, from traumatizing kind of experiences. So I think that we just, similar to pain, we have these one words that are so powerful, but they encompass such multitudes that we do need, more words to capture all of these different types of feelings that we have. So I think that that's, kind of one reason that we tend to view fear as just negative, is because it's just applied to so much, when there is a lot of differences within that, within those experiences.
Are there any differences you've come across when studying other cultures in the language side of it? Are there other cultures that might have more of a breakdown of different words for different fear experiences?
Yeah, I don't have off the top of my head all of the different words, but I know in different languages there are different emotional words that we just don't have a translation for. Mm-hmm. Even if we think about like Schadenfreude, the German word for feeling good about another's misfortune, we don't have an exact translation of that word in English. We've just mostly used Schadenfreude now. So it is, you can see that in cultures that have more words, they have, they may even experience that differently, because they're raised in a culture that has this unique label for a unique experience.
And this must be a subject then that has so much room to study, all of the cultural differences, language differences. As we're talking about the horror movies there, the differences between the kind of subtleties maybe in acting in Japanese horror movies and those differences with American movies. There's so much depth to this topic.
There really is, and there's more research, more people who are looking into it. If you Google recreational horror, it's really kind of a growing landscape of literature looking at how people are doing scary things and why. And it is a fascinating kind of avenue to explore, and even within the same culture, looking at trends over time. So, one of my favorite things to do is to look at our monster movies and see how they reflect so well the challenges of the day, from the nuclear threats and aliens and terrorism and robots. You can see all of these different real world kind of fears translated and reflected in our horror movies. And I think that's really a wonderful example of how we can use fiction and we can use entertainment to tackle real world fears, to make them more manageable, to give us a sense of control over these things that we don't understand, that we don't have a lot of certainty about. Even with the pandemic in the early months of it, so last March, April, all of the pandemic movies were trending on Netflix, and even though they're not offering us useful information or actionable information, they do generate a sense of control, of like, oh, I got this. I actually have some friends who did research into horror fans and measures of resilience and the pandemic. And they found that those who were fans of the apocalyptic type horror movies did also rate higher on certain measures of resilience. So even though it's not like we're going to learn how to survive a pandemic by watching The Walking Dead, it does generate a feeling of like, no, I can imagine this. I can see what that would look like, and it does give us a sense of control.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think actually the book World War Z was written as a warning based on what happened with SARS initially That was actually written by someone who views himself as someone who studies like geopolitics. So the zombies are just like a metaphor for that kind of virus that could take over the world. But the way it started, I think that virus kind of kicks off in China, and China tried to kind of hide it, that sort of thing. So there's like really big kind of real world parallels in that book.
Yeah. There's a book, one of my favorites, called On Monsters by Stephen Asma, ASMA. And it's just a wonderful kind of historical look at the history of monsters and how they reflect, the challenges of the day. And it's just, I just think it's so cool that you can really see, going all the way back to the ancient myths and biblical kind of monsters that, that's when our challenges were, monumental environmental kind of questions of why is it raining? Why is it thundering? With the challenges of global warming, we're kind of back to that, nature as biggest beast. What will we do?
Yeah, which is really interesting. And I think makes me very much think of part of your work talks about the idea of fear on a kind of political level, that it's something that can be divisive or reflects division in our societies.
Yeah, that was where a lot of my work started in sociology, looking at how fear is divisive and how, I've done a number of seminars called, hijacking fear, how fear is used by politicians, the media to drive behavior, because it is so effective. I mean, if you scare someone and then you follow up immediately with, but I have the answer, you've got that person's support. And it is one of my biggest things about, trying to highlight some of the positive aspects of engaging with scary material, is that it does help us reclaim our fear experience, so that it's not going to be used to manipulate or to drive divisions. Because, so much of hate is just fear of people who are different, and we, if we can become more comfortable with that uncertainty, then we open our minds, we open our hearts. So it is, I think, so important for people to not to push their boundaries in ways that they can essentially practice being afraid, so that it doesn't end up controlling their lives. They can, keep fear in a healthy way, because it ultimately is responsible for our survival. It's good to have a healthy kind of threat response. We just want to make sure that it's working for us.
Yeah, so that's very much getting into that idea of not necessarily allowing those kind of emotions to control you, but still being able to maybe take a step back. And it makes me think very much, we're talking about the pandemic. I can't remember the name of the book. I wish I could, because I was trying to think about it at a different point as well. Someone who was studying the kind of evolutionary biological roots of our political ideas. And they talk very much about that fear of other people, the people that look different to us or are from different places, that is potentially something that's around something like a pandemic or viruses, where if someone looks different to you, the likelihood is that they're from a different place, and that they're then potentially bringing different kinds of viruses, microbes and things that your body isn't set up to deal with at that point. Which I think is just a really kind of fascinating idea.
Yeah, and I think that, just the name of your podcast, Curiosity Cake, it's if we can adopt that perspective of being curious about things that are different, rather than, going directly towards, oh no, scary, bad, but thinking, oh, this is interesting, what's going on here, is such a healthier perspective. Especially when if we don't want to be curious about a charging bear coming right at us. But I'm confident that we have our brains are amazing. We are capable of thinking and differentiating and knowing that, okay, this snake is going to bite me. This person is different, but let me be curious and not afraid.
And I think, again, bringing us around to like horror movie stories, the haunted houses experiences, things like that. I think these are things that on the cultural level can, people can turn their noses up at and really look down on and be very dismissive of. But I think it's really interesting that you're putting these things out there as something that helps to some extent kind of train ourselves kind of psychologically, and even getting into that kind of political kind of level, which is just really interesting.
Yeah, and I really encourage people to kind of look at the vast kind of variety of different types of horror that's out there. I think that people who would say, "Oh, I'm not a horror fan," there's so many different genres within the horror genre or subgenres. And finding kind of like I'm not a really big fan of body horror movies. I think I have a very sensitive disgust kind of response. And so I'm more like the psychological horror movies, but there's such a variety out there. And I think that it's good to, as we get older, continue to kind of check in on our tastes. Like, okay, well, maybe I didn't like this type of horror movie when I was 13, but let me give it a try and see if I feel differently today, or a different, just continuing to try things to challenge our assumptions about what we will and won't like, and to try new things.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting idea as well, because I find that as I've gotten older, my interest in horror has really changed, and I don't watch it so much anymore, or read it so much anymore. And some of the things that I used to really love, when I was younger, like as a teenager, now I find a bit, just a bit silly. But I will still watch things like, recently things like Hereditary, I thought was just amazing. Those kind of folk horror things are really interesting. There's the British director that makes really interesting things like Kill List. I think are really interesting as well.
Yeah. And our taste changes with what's happening in our life. The pandemic has just been so difficult. And so I think that, people are going to, I know for myself, I've found a lot of comfort in going back and just watching reruns of my favorite sitcoms, because it's just so known. There's no surprises, there's no anxiety. And, right now everything is just kind of feeling so raw that kind of comfort is very much appreciated. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. Have you seen any kind of change then in I'm not sure how open the US is, but have you seen any change then in people's desire to go and access things like the haunted experiences that are there?
Yeah, they were, I think that it is going to come down to people's, kind of stress sensitivity. But I think that the desire to go out and do scary things was high this past Halloween. It's so hard to look at numbers from this past year, though, because of the restrictions on how many people could go in general. So
of course,
I know that a haunted attraction here in Denver was selling out most nights. But again, they were at 50% capacity. But the desire was there. People, I think, we're so ready to engage. We want to be together. We want to, we want to do something scary with our friends and come out and know that we can survive. Like, okay, we did this. It feels, finally we can breathe. We all want that. And I think we're all just really, the pandemic fatigue is real. We want to get out there.
So I'm wondering then, Margee, about your own kind of experiences of fear. Like, what are the kinds of things that you enjoy that are creating fear?
I do like a lot of the physical, thrills. I went skydiving, and that was just amazing. It was so cool. Rock climbing, things like that are really fun. So I like those types of physical challenges that, especially as I get older, I know it's very important to continue to do those scary physical things, because, as you get older, you kind of restrict your life more and more around protection, and that just ultimately will, lead to weaker bones and muscles. So I find that as I'm getting older, that I want to do the things that, I am afraid of physically, but also things that are going to continue to push me mentally, so I can keep my cognitive abilities as long as possible.
I think that sounds like a really brilliant idea, like keeping your muscle strength, is really important, but also keeping like your mental strength as well, like your ability to, to just, think and work through problems and things. So I wonder then, does anyone consider how these kind of horror experiences might affect our fear of death? I'm thinking that particularly as you're talking about, as you're getting older and that sort of thing, is there something there as well that can help people with that idea of, our mortality?
I think that there have, I can't remember off the top of my mind, but
I'm putting you a bit on the spot
the fear
there.
of death is, I know it's a wide landscape of literature and research that's been done. And I want to say I remember a couple of studies looking at that connection of, fear of death and how it relates to horror movies, but I can't think of it off the top of my mind. But certainly so many horror movies are kind of playing with that idea of what is going to happen. And I do think that we can use the horror movies to confront those fears, because it's fear of death is so layered. There's the fear of our own death, of our loved one's death. There's the fear of how we're going to die, what's going to happen to our body, what's going to happen to our soul. I mean, there's so many layers to it, and we can explore all of those things through horror, which is great, because we need some way to kind of dip our toe into that existential threat without falling all the way in.
And again, I think it's really bringing to mind, as you're talking about those cultural differences. I used to read a lot around like Buddhist literature, and there's kind of practices there of meditating on death, but literally kind of meditating, watching a body of a dead person decaying, and that's such a different expression to, what we're talking about of maybe confronting our fear of death, or just our fears generally through horror movies, or these other kind of thrill ride experiences and things.
Yeah, there's some death reflections, and I talk about it in the book, and what they leave me with, and I think some of them are definitely the intent is to leave you with a feeling of greater compassion and love and just connection. And oh my gosh, I want to go and hug my family, because when you meditate on death, you ultimately want to celebrate life. And so there's the Memento Mori, remember one day you will die. And I think that can be a really beautiful thing to remind yourself of occasionally, not necessarily all the time, but to remember that, this life is short, and we should appreciate the people and the things that we have, while we're here.
Yeah, which I think sounds like a great place to end there. So Margee, please tell us about, I know you've got the Fear book. I know that was out a little while ago, but you've also got the Pain book coming out. So can you tell us about those, as well as how people can just find out about you a bit more in general?
Sure. So my book, Scream, Chilling Adventures in the Science of Fear, is available now. And then Ouch, Why Pain Hurts and Why It Doesn't Have to will be available in March. And both of those people can read about on my website, margeekerr.com. I'm most active on Instagram at Margee Kerr, occasionally on Twitter, which is also just at Margee Kerr. So yeah, those are where people can find me.
Margee, I've really enjoyed that conversation. I think that's definitely one of my favorite conversations so far. So thanks very much for joining us and for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's a great podcast, and I'm happy to have the talk. So thank you very much.
Before we end this episode, I want to share promos for a couple of podcasts I've been really enjoying lately.
Do you love plants? Don't be silly. Of course you do. You might just not know it yet. I'm Vikram Baliga, the host of the Planthropology Podcast, the show where we dive into the lives and careers of some really cool plant people. Join me each episode as I chat with students, scientists, and professionals in the natural sciences and figure out what keeps them coming back for more. We'll explore their work, the ways they got into their fields, why they love plants and nature so much, and why you should love those things too. Planthropology is laid back and conversational and will keep you laughing and engaged whether you're a scientist or not. Follow along for this adventure into the sciences and keep being really cool plant people.
those stories you were supposed to read in high school?
Dickens.
Poe.
That's literally all the names I can think of.
Did you read them?
Obviously I didn't.
Let us read them for you.
That sounds dangerous.
What does?
Reading?
It might go badly.
But that's half the fun.
I'm Ken Sandberg.
And I'm Heather Michelle Lawler.
Check out Campfire Classics, where we try to read those books that look really good on your shelf.
Campfire Classics is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Listen, like, follow.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Remember to rate and review the show on your podcast app, as well as Podchaser and Good Pods if you're on those. And get in touch on Twitter, through the website or Instagram via the link tree, and let me know what topics you'd like to hear in the future. Bye for now.
Curiosity Cake.